Hello, TDXs. After a solid 5 days of waiting for y'all to vote, I have closed the polls and gathered all the information and will now present to you the ultimate expert community tower tier list. But before we head into the ranking, I would like to give a very brief overview of the methodology / criteria over how these towers are being evaluated. First of all, I will be giving the tower a very short and brief introduction, then list the pros, the cons, and lastly, justify its placement in the form of a reflection. I will try my very hardest to do it justice, regardless of where the tower ends up. And I'll even throw in some of what I personally think as well. Reminder, this is a community tier list. Afterward, I will present the votes in the form of a pie chart and where it ranks in the tier list thus far. Another reminder, this is a community tier list. The way the tower's placements are calculated goes as follows. If Cryo Ranger has been voted 20% D tier and 80% S tier, then she shall be declared S tier. As for towers ranked within a tier, they'd be placed by a majority of votes. For example, both Cryo Ranger and Scarecrow have 80% S tier votes, but Scarecrow has a 1% lead against Cryo Ranger, so Scarecrow shall be ranked above her. Lastly, this is a community tier list, so please hold off on the torches and pitchforks and be mindful of what everyone else thinks. With that being said, please enjoy the video. So, this video is long overdue, mainly because I underestimated the amount of work it would take to finish it. But, for the most part, 90% or more, should still be accurate, for there were no real big changes to these towers, excluding the new ones, and I hope you can forgive me. As for the new towers, I will have a bonus section at the end where I'll personally rank them. But other than that,
the subsequent content may incorporate a variety of rapidly oscillating luminescent values, abrupt chromatic transitions, high-intensity flickering visual stimuli, and/or spatially disorientating optical patterns that have a potential to provoke photosensitive epileptic seizures or other adverse neuropsychological reactions in a subset of the population. Individuals possessing a diagnosed predisposition to photosensitive epilepsy, as well as those with an undetermined neurological sensitivity threshold, are hereby strongly advised to refrain from the visual engagement with aforementioned material unless deemed safe by a licensed medical professional with a relevant specialization. Manifestations of potential neurological distress may include, but are not limited to, myoclonic jerks, temporary visual impairment, vertiginous sensations, disorientation, altered states of consciousness, generalized tonic-clonic seizure activity. Should you or any nearby observer begin to exhibit one or more of these signs, cease all interaction with the content immediately. Engage in a recovery protocol involving reduced sensory input, and if necessary, initiate contact with emergency medical services. Your discretion is not only advised, but is imperative for the preservation of neurological well-being.
We make it look easy.
let's be real. None of you guys are surprised by this placement. Ranger at the bottom of D tier. Wow. It makes sense since it is the very first tower you'll get, making it very simplistic by default. It has the essentials to get people started, cheap placement cost, and overall upgrades, making it a viable bait option. Ranger has stealth detection on its top path and bullet penetration on its bottom. He also has decent AoE capabilities with his grenade ability and underbarrel passive that leaves a lingering patch of fire. On to the cons. Ranger has the lowest potential out there. Low damage ceiling, low HP, and lacks flying detection. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Ranger's position at the bottom of D tier, it simply is not built for anything harder than intermediate. Ranger's damage ceiling gets capped out very early on, and that's quite frankly where its value falls flat. He isn't able to capitalize on any of its other strengths like hidden detection and armor penetration if he's unable to finish the job. To finish off the Ranger segment, here are my personal thoughts and of a few others. Pause if you wish to read them all. And a couple extra thoughts in the hundreds of responses that I found quite amusing. On to the next. It is quite unfortunate that our glorious war hero ranks this low on the list. Crown Ranger has a great balance between its freeze and damage potential, slowing both early slow and fast enemies, even unlocking freeze penetration on its bottom path. Its cheap pricing also allows it to be synergized well with other slow/stun towers, Slammer for example, indirectly making it a viable bait option. On to the cons. It is affected by Imbuwasose, aka money better well spent on something else, making it difficult to find value without accidentally overstepping. Crown Ranger has low damage output, low HP, and relies on supports to reach its maximum potential. That isn't even that high. This is without factoring in its inaccessibility, it being an event tower, making it only really useful in small niche cases, or if you're Takuna. Here are the community's votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Crown Ranger's place at the second to last position in D tier, it is simply underpowered. Glorified sub-DPS support tower that suffers from Imbuwasose, and on top of everything is exclusive. But even if the devs wanted to buff her, she is quite literally the oldest event tower, so there isn't really any incentive to buff her. To finish off Crown Ranger's segment, here are my personal thoughts and of a few others. Pause if you wish to read them all. And a couple of extra thoughts that I found quite amusing. On to the next.
Hi, my name is Carmen Winstead. I am 17 years old. I am very similar to you. Did I mention to you that this video is dead?
Nah. We get the second bit. Let me think again.
Remy lost all of the budget through gambling.
Let me expand on it now. So, what did Remy do? Remy gambled all of the funds, so the budget is booty. Boom. Genius. Alright.
Remy gambled out of the budget. Now the video is booty.
Follow me at YouTube. Wait, no. Maybe instead we should follow youtube.com/@TerryTheTurtle. Don't forget the double T at the end.
Rapaholics. We make it look easy.
I think that was the one. That was the one.
Disappointingly, at the top of D tier is Sniper. He honestly should be lower. Sniper is pretty cheap to unlock, place, and upgrade, making him baitable. Covers many bases like stealth and flying detection on both paths, and laser type damage on its bottom path. Speaking of bottom path, unlocks a stealth reveal ability fairly early on, complemented by its immense range and gives it minimal micro and placement precision. Immediately onto the cons. It trades off one thing for many others. As a result, it underperforms everywhere. Because you are paying for a variety of amenities that you aren't constantly capitalizing on, it results in cost inefficiency, since that money would have been better spent on focusing on what you specifically are worried about. Getting more bang for your buck, which sums up its difficulty to use at its highest potential. Yes, unfortunately, it has a high skill ceiling, requiring a lot of effort and conditioning to min-max, aka Imbuwasose. Discourages skipping and encourages playing on longer maps, resulting in a slower playstyle. Then there is the egregious level locking at level 15, which I will not be getting into because that crime in itself is deserving of its own separate video. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Sniper's position at the top of D tier, all of the pros can be turned into a con, since to maximize its full potential encourages a playstyle completely centered around it, leaving out any room for flexibility. So while you can make it decently far, it will take a lot of time and conditioning to get there, which doesn't even factor in the fight with Eradicator Mark II, a fight you can't win as far as I'm concerned. Kicking off the start of C tier is the Rizman industry plant himself, Mine Layer. Specializing in leak protection, Mine Layer is a place and forget type of tower with very little to no micro required. Mine Layer possesses stealth detection on its top path and explosive penetration on the bottom. It is extremely undervalued in terms of his damage potential, providing good crowd control and even boss killing capabilities if given the prep time. Quickly onto the cons. Falls victim to Imbawasose, requiring heavy investments in time and money. Not to mention the conditioning with choosing a large map, making sure to cover its lack of flying detection and sustain, since its health pool is extremely small. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Mine Layer's position at the bottom of C tier, leak protection based towers aren't really that useful if you simply just focus on not leaking at all. However, there is potential to make it funnily viable if given the immense prep time, shown with its underrated boss killing capabilities. Coming in next is one of the most forgettable towers, Patrol Boat, second to last in C tier. Patrol Boat is a solid crowd control option on both paths. Its early upgrades are fairly cheap and decently cost efficient, top path focusing on range with explosive damage and passive missiles, while the bottom gets up close and personal with its flamethrower, outputting high DPS. And surprisingly enough, it can be buffed by support towers. Moving on to the cons. Absolutely no hidden detection at all and lacks flying until its 5th tier upgrade. Patrol Boat can only be placed on maps with water, and even then needs to be viable bodies of water, so not oil rig. Possesses a low amount of HP for the sum of money spent, and can't be healed by medic for some reason. I guess since it's autonomous. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Patrol Boat's position at the second to last place in C tier, Patrol Boat has the AoE and DPS potential, but is held back by its shackle to water and lack of both hidden and flying detection, until the last upgrade. Up next is the Shotgunner. There was supposed to be a generic insult here, but I forgot to put that in, so just pretend there was a little joke there. Anyways, Shotgunner is by far the cheapest tower to unlock with gold. Its early upgrades are very cost efficient and is baitable. Has the crowd control potential within its limited range. This is a bit of foreshadowing for later. Unlocks hidden detection on its top path and, funnily enough, flying detection and armor penetration on its bottom path. Shotgunner also has undervalued support abilities, top path gaining % based healing in an area, bypassing the no friendly buffs attribute, and its bottom unstuns towers. But that's it. Onto the cons. Shotgunner's damage potential falls off heavily in the early game. Its range is super short, struggling to deal with enemies that are fast, tanky, and have high resistances, not mentioning its very low HP, requiring assistance from other towers, resulting in Bawose. Then there's the jumpers. These fucks will be brought up again a lot. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Shotgunner's position at the middle of C tier, he has the tools at his disposal to be a solid early game tower, like crowd control, armor penetration, hidden and flying detection, but is held back heavily by its short range. Shotgunner's abilities are also too niche to really be applicable in-game. And coming in at the top of C tier is Operator, the second coming of Ranger himself, but half the charisma. Operator is fairly cheap and cost efficient. Baitable. Has hidden detection at a decent price, making it a good option for early game defense. Operator is also capable of acting as decent leak protection with its bottom path ability, spawning in a Humvee with subpar DPS. Now onto the cons. Operator has a low damage potential / ceiling, getting capped out very early on, lacking flying and bullet penetration. That's it. He's a very simplistic tower. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Operator's position at the top of C tier, while not having the best DPS nor detections, he somewhat remains consistent across various situations. With a fairly underwhelming kit and an ability to sometimes catch leaks, somewhat makes him a reliable guy. Kicking off the start of B tier is Cryo Blaster. Obviously has amazing freezing capabilities, excelling on shorter maps like Hard and Impossible, giving other towers more time to deal damage. Able to freeze slow enemies and slow down fast enemies. Frozen enemies are also given a permanent slow effect while taking increased damage. This is all without mentioning its combo potential with other freeze towers for natural synergy. Its top path is good for freezing groups, basically crowd control, and unlocks freeze penetration, bypassing freeze resistance, while its bottom path focuses its freeze power onto a singular enemy. Onto the cons. Cryo Blaster lacks flying detection, has low freeze and little to no damage in its early stages, adding to its high skill ceiling in terms of maximizing potential. For instance, it's difficult to balance cash investments with other towers, in some cases even falling under Imboswe. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Cryo Blaster's rank at the bottom of B tier, it has incredible potential with its freezing capabilities, being able to freeze tanky and fast enemies early and later on. However, in turn has an extremely high skill ceiling, indirectly affecting it with Imboswe. Next up, we coincidentally have another ice tower, Mima herself, Icebreaker. On the surface, she is quite simple, having only one upgrade path like the other event towers. Icebreaker has a good balance between freeze, damage output, and crowd control. Her melee damage dealt is increased against frozen enemies, complementing her kit, making shorter maps easier, having very high freeze potential / utility. That being a part of her freeze abilities. Ice Shard being very simple to understand and capable of easily freezing enemies. Her next ability, Snowstorm, can keep multiple enemies frozen within an area. Moving on to the cons. Icebreaker is no longer obtainable due to event exclusivity. She lacks hidden detection, and obviously being a melee tower, she lacks both range and flying detection. The jumpers make short work of her, not even giving her a chance to be frozen. Icebreaker is also very niche and has a very high skill ceiling, incentivizing Imboswe. Ice towers in general are already quite confusing to understand with the lack of transparency on freeze value, which could make Icebreaker difficult to use effectively. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Icebreaker's position at the second to last place in C tier, she has insane freeze and damage potential, complemented well with her abilities. However, is held back by the immense skill ceiling to really capitalize on those strengths, directly affecting her with Imboswe. That's all without mentioning Icebreaker's inaccessibility due to her being an event tower. Next on the chopping block, coming third to last in the B tier, is Sentry. Sentry is very cheap while also being cost efficient, which, like many others before it, is a viable bait option. However, is even more incentivized by its ability to rebuild itself. Its pricing and small placement size allow for a more spread out playstyle, great for catching leaks. Gaining both stealth and armor penetration on the top path while unlocking missiles for AoE and increases in its range of motion on the bottom. Quickly onto the cons. Sentry has very low HP, and it doesn't help that it can't be healed nor buffed with its no friendly buffs attribute. Sentry's cone range of motion affects its damage potential, making it rely on specific maps to make the most of its limited line of sight. Sentry lacks flying detection, which is honestly to be expected since it can't see most of the stuff on the ground. Sentry is also one of the few towers that has an aim time, which makes killing faster enemies quite difficult. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Sentry's position at the third to last place in B tier, Sentry has great early to mid-game potential, having stealth, armor penetration, and crowd control at very cost-efficient prices, all with additional baiting benefits with its one-time rebuild, but is all taken back by its cone range of motion, limiting it to certain maps to be used effectively. And even if Sentry were to be used on a viable map, we would still have to factor in its extremely small health pool and the no friendly buffs attribute, which makes using it very dicey since there's no way to protect it. Now, reaching the middle point of B tier, we have Toxicnator. Insane crowd control potential with its virtual no-hit limit paired with the absence of toxic resistance, allowing Toxicnator to always be able to deal its full raw damage. Toxicnator excels on longer maps with his gas damage over time properties, or DOT. Toxicnator also comes with a powerful debuff ability that allows towers to deal a substantial 30% more damage to enemies and 10% to bosses on its bottom path. Moving on to the cons. Toxicnator is extremely cost inefficient if not used for crowd control purposes, due to it struggling immensely with dealing single target damage. Speaking of struggle, it also struggles on shorter maps since it is unable to take full advantage of the DOT. Lastly, Toxicnator simply isn't reliable by itself, requiring other DPS or support towers to make bringing him viable. For instance, Toxicnator's lack of flying detection.
Here are the community's votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far.
To justify Toxicnator's position at the middle of B tier, Toxicnator has crazy crowd control potential with its virtual no-hit limit paired with the absence of any resistance to gas, all without mentioning its support capabilities when it comes to its debuffing ability. However, crowd control isn't really as demanding as it used to be, and could be really punishing if not supported correctly. Toxicnator's highs are extremely high, but its lows are extremely low. To finish off the Toxicnator segment, here are my personal thoughts and of a few others, pause if you wish to read them all, and a couple of extra thoughts that I found quite amusing. Now, I know we have a long way to go before we get to the number 1 tower, but I'd like to go ahead and preemptively say that this next tower is that guy. And it's not just about the popular vote, because sometimes, to be the greatest tower, you have to be... Next up in the middle of B tier is TDX's best tower, by far. No contest or proof needed, he's just that guy. Barracks probably has the lowest skill ceiling of any tower, being extremely easy to use and understand. And being a spawner tower means having built-in leak protection and additionally ignores line of sight. Barracks is also able to cover many damage types with its various troops. Onto the cons. Barracks' DPS gets hard capped especially when entering the late game. Even in the early game, things like collision resistance and flying enemies gives barracks a run for their money. Then there's the limit to its placement and the amount of troops on the field, which results in longer playtimes if we are trying to maximize its potential. And lastly, even if we wanted to help a brother out, barracks are unable to be buffed by support towers.
Here are the community's votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far.
To justify barracks' position at the middle of B tier, barracks is extremely easy to use and brings a lot of value to the team, being able to cover many damage types and offer great leak protection, basically being the ultimate sub DPS tower. However, there are the chains that John put on a bro. From the tons of limitations to the specific enemies that counter barracks, leads to its damage potential getting capped out extremely hard. Hashtag justice for barracks. Moving on to the upper part of B tier, we have artillery, one of my personal favorite towers. Artillery is known for its high damage per shot and incredible range on both paths. Who am I kidding? It's actually known for its infamous manual aim that gives players full control of where they want to specifically attack. And, funnily enough, technically has flying detection through splash transfer. For the most part, artillery is a very cost-efficient crowd control option throughout all stages of the game. Artillery gets massive increases with its damage and health on the bottom path, even gaining explosion penetration. Oh, and the stun immunity that nobody cares about. As for the top path, eventually converts to automatic targeting and gets a faster fire rate. And lastly, both paths actually can be buffed and healed by supports. Onto the cons. Artillery has a high skill ceiling, often requiring lots of attention, factoring in its projectile-based attack that has travel time. Depending on the placement, missing shots can be less forgiving and even punishing, especially on shorter maps. Same applies for the fast enemies, especially the jumper! Lastly, its flying detection isn't really that reliable. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify artillery's placement nearing the top of B tier, artillery is a solid crowd control option, having great overall cost efficiency, range, and general usage throughout all stages of the game. However, the demand for specific targeting and crowd control in general has decreased heavily. It also doesn't help that artillery's skill ceiling is quite demanding for the amount of value it can provide. Next on the list of the upper echelons of B tier is surprisingly Grenadier. Grenadier is definitely one of the easier to use and understand types of towers, having very little nuance. Grenadier has decent crowd control and cost efficiency, making it a good enough option for early game. Its bottom path has stunning capabilities, allowing it to stall groups of enemies, or if spread out, can stall a single enemy fairly well. Its top path, on the other hand, simply gains stealth detection. Onto the cons. Grenadier's damage output and crowd control falls off heavily in the early game, getting crippled further with the mere existence of explosive resistant enemies. Has low range, making him struggle against fast enemies, especially jump! Grenadier must be paired with support and DPS towers to be used effectively. For instance, his very low HP making sustainability quite difficult even with medic. And lastly, has no flying detection. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Grenadier's position at the upper echelon of B tier, Grenadier, while being extremely mediocre in terms of damage output, range, and sustainability, often making him fall off very fast in the early game, is saved by its ability to stall groups of enemies and even individual ones if spread out. While this may seem very basic, that's all it really needs to be this high up in B tier. The simple fact that it can stall everything aside from bosses is all it really needs to shine, until you unlock better stalling options. Finally, at the top of B tier is one of the oldest towers in TDX, Missile Trooper. Missile Trooper is quite versatile in usage, main example being its long range and capabilities to handle both crowds and single target enemies. This is best shown by its tripled damage dealt on the primary target, meaning that the other enemies hit with the splash damage from the initial explosion will get dealt the original amount of damage. Missile Trooper's bottom path has the option to unlock explosive penetration and a larger blast radius, or a faster fire rate, while the top path simply gets more damage and eventually flying detection. Onto the cons. Missile Trooper is rather difficult to understand and use effectively, often being overlooked. Struggling early game due to its slow fire rate and facing explosive resistant enemies. It doesn't help that it does not have reliable flying detection, only unlocking it at the 5th tier upgrade on its top path. While on the topic of the top path, Missile Trooper gains aim time, reducing its fire rate in favor of more damage, making matchups against faster enemies dicey. Especially jump! Missile Trooper's bottom path actually loses its explosive penetration and increased blast radius in favor of increased fire rate. This could be a tricky trade-off if players aren't aware of what they're getting into. And lastly, has poor sustainability. With Missile Trooper's HP being extremely low, it's hard to keep him alive, even with medic. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Missile Trooper's position at the top of B tier, Missile Trooper is quite versatile, having the ability to handle both crowds and single target enemies, explosive penetration, and even flying detection, but is held back by surprisingly being overlooked. While Missile Trooper might not have the best early game potential with its low starting fire rate and unreliable flying detection, he has, instead, insane mid to late game potential, with its ability to deal triple the amount of damage onto a single enemy, giving him insane boss killing capabilities, but is unfortunately underutilized since things like aim time and his extremely low sustainability deters players from using him. This is all without mentioning how the bottom path operates and how it seemingly trades some of its desired traits for another, which might further de-incentivize Missile Trooper's usage. Coming in at the start of A tier is Cryo Helicopter. Cryo Heli provides superior freeze, being the best ice tower by far, and stalling support. So much so, it can freeze a majority of enemies quite easily, even Zeus. Additionally, frozen enemies can take up to 40% more damage, 10% more than Cryo Blaster, and are permanently slowed after the fact. Basically just Cryo Blaster, but better. Cryo Heli is also able to ignore freeze resistance at its 5th tier upgrade, and essentially has crowd control, being able to freeze several enemies in an area with its primary and passive cryo missiles. Cryo Heli, being a helicopter, gives it map-wide range, is unaffected by line of sight, can avoid or mitigate enemy attacks by moving away, and lastly, doesn't take up placement space. The combination of his maneuverability and freezing capabilities makes him very versatile for any map, both short and long. Onto the cons. For some reason, it doesn't have flying detection and can't be healed nor buffed. Cryo Heli is rather expensive to upgrade and has a limited placement limit of 2 to 3. Has poor damage output, making it a glorified support tower that requires the assistance of other towers. Cryo Heli's sustainability could also be an issue due to anti-air enemy attacks, requiring increased attention and micro to reposition. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Cryo Heli's position at the start of A tier, Cryo Heli has the best freeze potential of all the ice-based towers, being able to freeze a majority of enemies, additionally giving extra buffs when frozen. However, demands a lot of attention and care. For one, Cryo Heli is essentially turned into a support tower, requiring extra assistance to finish off frozen enemies, and 2, are constantly under fire from anti-air enemies, needing attention to micro away from incoming attacks. The second to last place in A tier is Mine Layer with twice the swag, the Golden Mine Layer. As much as I hate to admit it, Golden Mine Layer is basically a better version of the regular Mine Layer, generally being more cost efficient, having innate stealth detection, and significantly more health. Golden Mine Layer has extremely high damage potential, capable of easily wiping out bosses, along with superior crowd control and leak protection. His max bottom path mines can stun enemies, grouping them up and essentially spending less mines, making it extremely useful and effective on shorter maps. Incredible utility from his abilities. The top path crossbow mines can target certain and distant enemies, and are overall useful for stacking mines for a bigger blow. While his bottom path thrown mine has map-wide range, deals lots of damage, has fly detection, unlocks explosive penetration, and stuns enemies, including bosses. Onto the cons. Golden Mine Layer's full potential is partially capped. Having a placement limit takes quite a bit of time to accumulate mines, encouraging a slower playstyle. And his flying detection is unreliable. While technically he can target flying, he only goes for the strongest. He also can't target enemies too close, and is overall an expensive upgrade for flying detection. And lastly, is fairly niche. It is generally easier to invest into other DPS towers for defense. And but will so say. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Golden Mine Layer's position at the second to last place in A tier, Golden Mine Layer is honestly super underappreciated, having insane raw damage and crowd control potential, but is frequently boiled down to being a leak protection tower. Golden Mine Layer's abilities offer great utility in both early and late game, but can be hard to maximize its potential, often being tedious or even difficult to balance with other towers, falling victim to Imbose. Coming up next is the unfinished tower, Relic. Relic is viable throughout all stages of the game. For instance, having reliable stealth detection for the early game and massive DPS for the late game. And being a spawner tower, comes with map-wide range and leak protection. Relic is fairly cheap to place and upgrade at its earlier levels, in turn being very cost efficient, especially with the archers and overseers. Speaking of which, the archers for some reason deal melee damage, which can make for a cheap and reliable early to mid game option against other resistances. Moving on to the cons. Relic, being a spawner tower, gives it limited placement, map dependency, and encourages a slower playstyle, and has no flying detection, at least for now. Both melee and collision resistance can be problematic for units like the Archer and even the Overseer. Speaking of the Overseer, it is extremely expensive, making it a steep late game investment. Relic is mostly a sub DPS tower, heavily recommended to use alongside other better DPS towers. And lastly, being an event tower is no longer obtainable. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Relic's place at the lower end of A tier, Relic is a solid sub DPS tower to have at all stages of the game, but is held back by being a sub DPS tower. While being extremely reliable, Relic can only take you so far before you have to take matters into your own hands. Surprisingly, up next is the Warship. Hashtag washed? Warship has incredible damage output and crowd control potential. Its bottom path gains stealth detection and eventually a global stealth reveal ability. while the top path unlocks splash transfer, technically giving Warship flying detection. Warship has massive range, being able to cover the entire map, essentially becoming a leak protection tower. And lastly, Warship's large health pool allows for it to survive most attacks. Onto the cons. Warship is very expensive overall, being a hefty investment at times, has a large placement size, requiring maps with water and water that can sustain its size. Warship is a priority target for most bosses, which can get it killed quite easily, even with its large HP, mostly due to percentage-based damage. Warship's flying detection is very unreliable. Its splash transfer only works when enemies are near the explosion. Lastly, Warship cannot be buffed nor healed, unless you are Shotgunner. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Warship's position next to the other low-end A-tier towers, Warship has great map-wide crowd control capabilities, but is vulnerable and an expensive investment. All without mentioning it being bounded to specific maps and requiring aid in the flying and even single target damage department. Slowly coming out the bottom and into the middle of A tier is the Mobster. Mobster is useful throughout the entire game in even scales. His early upgrades are cheap and cost efficient. The spawned units can even be used for leak protection. Mobster himself and even the goons can detect stealth early and unlock bullet penetration, eventually, on both paths. His top path units specifically get stealth detection and bullet penetration, but is generally more focused on DPS, whereas the bottom path is primarily about eco, providing a passive ability, life insurance, that mitigates cash loss on tower deaths, and gains an active ability, bounty, being able to be placed on enemies, which gives cash based on HP. Lastly, Mobster's money generation essentially scales with waves, being capable of even outscaling farm. Onto the cons. Mobster can be difficult to use and understand, having a fairly high skill ceiling, requiring some knowledge to balance between itself and other towers. Intense micro is essential to maximize its eco potential. Mobster has no flying detection, which makes him unable to place bounties on flying enemies. His low HP makes survivability in the early game quite shaky. And lastly, the spawned goons fall off during the late game. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Mobster's position in the middle of A tier, Mobster has both great DPS and economic value, especially its economic value, being able to eventually outscale farm. However, has a very demanding skill ceiling, requiring a lot of attention and micro to get the most value out of him. The leak protection and DPS in general is also very dicey, especially entering the late game. Next up in the A tier is the Tower Battles Zed. The Zed has incredible damage output potential, boasting one of the highest DPS values without the help of supports, even outranking all of the other spawner towers, not including collision damage. Zed unlocks armor penetration on its primary attack and missiles as its passive, and being a spawner tower, comes with map-wide range and leak protection, obviously making it excel on larger and longer maps. The Zed also has high troop health value across all upgrades, adding to its good leak protection. Onto the cons. Zed, being a spawner tower, gives it limited placement, map dependency, and encourages a slower playstyle. Its early upgrades are quite expensive and cost inefficient until max level, making early game usage rather awkward. And the addition of collision resistance can be problematic for its leak protection value, along with its lack of fly detection. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Zed's placement at the middle point of A tier, Zed has incredible damage output, even outranking other spawner towers, being an overall solid independent source of pure damage. However, being a spawner tower, the Zed can easily get overwhelmed in the later stages of Expert, since it continuously moves without stopping. And while it does have leak protection potential with its map-wide range and high HP, its lack of flying detection and the mere existence of collision resistance makes it rather unreliable. It also sucks on short maps. And up next, in the direct middle of A tier, is Noel's favorite tower, Ghost. Ghost's early upgrades are extremely cost efficient, having flying detection built in, and stealth detection also basically built in since it's unlocked so early. She also comes with great range, above average DPS, and incredible survivability with her top path unlocking South Stealth, allowing her to even measure up to the late game with supports. Additionally, comes with abilities that offer useful utility. Her top path being a drone that has map-wide placements, bullet penetration, reveals stealthed enemies within its radius, and lastly, prioritizes high-value enemies like summoners. On the opposite path, she gains a grenade that stealths towers in an area, offering more survivability for herself and other towers. Onto the cons. Ghost's early game viability is a bit dicey since she is extremely weak to bullet resistance, which is made very apparent in the early game. Speaking of which, Ghost having low HP makes her struggle to survive in said early game. Her usefulness of stealthing towers is diminished when there are better options for survivability and longevity. The skill ceiling for timing these stealth grenades can also be a bit of a hassle. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Ghost's position at the exact middle of A tier, Ghost has very risky early game potential, having extremely great cost efficiency, survivability, both flying and stealth detection, all early on, but is cancelled out with her bullet type damage and vulnerability until her 3rd tier upgrade. Her low HP can honestly be neglected with the existence of Medic, but her not being able to pierce the bullet resistance sets her so far back. So unless Ghost has additional support, she unfortunately falls victim to Imbawasose. However, what really makes her this high on the list, and honestly makes up for the lack of bullet penetration, is her C7 drone, being an extremely powerful and useful tool that essentially fixes her weakness to resistances and even provides support to other towers by unstealthing enemies within its range and taking care of pesky high priority enemies. Reaching the upper ranks of A tier, we have Slammer. Slammer is extremely cheap and cost efficient to place and upgrade, and you already know what that means. She's baitable, making her a solid early game option that eventually evolves to be useful throughout the entire game. Slammer also has incredible crowd control and stun potential, with her top path increasing damage and the amount of enemies hit per swing, additionally unlocking an ability that deals tons of damage, removes the hit limit, and is now even able to stun bosses. This allows for great synergy using both paths to chain and stack stuns, providing insane stalling capabilities and crowd control support for other AoE towers. And lastly, has stun immunity on both paths, giving her maximum uptime on swinging that hammer. On to the cons. Being a melee tower, Slammer can't obviously hit flying enemies and has extremely low range, which can't be buffed any higher than her upgrades allow her to. Not to be confused with fire rate or damage buffs, she can still receive those. Her small range restricts her placement to always being next to the path, making her a prime target for enemy attacks. Staying on topic with her minuscule range makes her prone to leaking more often, which is further reinforced with her hit limit and slow fire rate. Lastly, she is weak to melee resistance and fast enemies, like the jump! Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Slammer's position at the higher parts of A tier, Slammer has insane crowd control and stun potential, which is further improved with her incredible synergy with herself. That and her viability throughout all stages of the game. With her potential to stand toe-to-toe with bosses both in support and bait ability, makes Slammer a solid pick. The only thing holding her back from honestly being S tier is her small range. Next up in the upper echelon of A tier is a tower that shouldn't have been an event tower, the Flame Trooper. Flame Trooper has great cost efficiency and obviously crowd control capabilities. And of course, being an event tower means it has a single upgrade path, which makes it very straightforward to use. His abilities provide great AoE damage and instant buff/debuff infliction onto all enemies within his surrounding area. Flame Trooper's debuff is also much easier to inflict in comparison to other debuff towers like Toxicnator, making his skill ceiling in that regard rather low. Speaking of which, maximizing his potential is quite easy. Simply setting his targeting to random can light more enemies on fire. Moving on to the cons. Flame Trooper being an event tower means accessibility is rather limited. I don't know why John decided to lock one of the most architectural towers behind a battle pass. Doesn't have stealth or flying detection, and its range is restricted, meaning it can't be buffed further. And lastly, Flame Trooper is weak to fire resistance. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Flame Trooper's position near the upper parts of A tier, Flame Trooper has a very low skill ceiling that gives very high value, being able to take on crowds of enemies and even act as a support by debuffing with its Ring of Fire ability. However, is quite inaccessible due to its event tower status, and relies on other towers to cover its weak points such as stealthed and flying enemies. Next up in the A tier is the original power creep himself, Armored Factory. The Armored Factory is without a doubt the best leak protector of all the spawner towers. Aside from the typical map-wide range that comes with all spawner towers, it also has high troop health and unlocks stealth detection on both paths. Its top one even unlocks flying detection, gaining more range, and acquires missiles that have explosive pierce. On the bottom, it increases the troop health substantially and has higher DPS than its counterpart. About the cons though, Armored Factory being a spawner tower gives it limited placement, map dependency, and encourages a slower playstyle. However, similar to the Z, suffers on shorter maps due to it constantly moving. Additionally, its upgrades are rather expensive, which doesn't help the fact that its damage output falls off during the late game. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Armored Factory's position at the upper parts of A tier, Armor Factory is a very reliable spawner tower that offers amazing all-around leak protection if invested into. However, it being a spawner tower may hinder people's playstyle greatly since maps can affect its performance considerably. While quite simple to use, there is nuance to its usage since its damage output gets capped out in the late game, meaning the skill ceiling is on the higher side. Entering the top 3 of A tier is the Golden Boy's sidekick, Golden Ranger. Golden Ranger is a solid all-rounder tower, being versatile throughout all stages of the game with both strong early and late game DPS, unlocking stealth detection on both paths fairly early. Additionally, having a rather large health pool gives it great independent survivability. Adding onto Golden Ranger's versatility, gains flying detection on its bottom path along with a grenade ability that has decent crowd control damage, but more importantly, is capable of stunning enemies and bosses. Onto the cons or whatever. Golden Ranger, being a golden tower, makes him weak against golden resistances, hindering any over-reliance on its DPS. Speaking of which, its flying detection capabilities are also not as reliable in the early game, since the upgrades for it can be a bit pricey. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Golden Ranger's place in the top 3 of A tier, Golden Ranger is one of the most versatile all-rounder towers in the game, having all kinds of detections and reliable DPS throughout the entire game, all without mentioning its additional ability that can add great crowd control support along with boss stunning capabilities. Quite literally, the only thing holding this beast back from being further up is the mere existence of Golden Resistance, preventing an over-reliance on it as a sole DPS. Coming in at the second place in A tier is Laser Gunner. Funnily enough, I thought he'd place below Golden Ranger, the supposed better version of Laser Gunner, but here we are anyway. Laser Gunner has arguably one of the best early game defenses, having innate stealth and flying detection on both paths, all while possessing very cost-efficient early upgrades. Laser Gunner's top path gains more range, pierce, and an ability that stuns and increases damage, whereas its bottom path gains a shockwave ability at the cost of reduced range. The shockwave grants good crowd control damage with its low cooldown, and can reveal stealthed enemies. Onto the cons. Laser Gunner has fairly low HP, which can make it struggle to survive in the early game, and obviously is weak to laser resistance. Lastly, his bottom path ability can be quite unreliable in terms of being used for unstealthing purposes, since its range is so small. Activating it at the right time can be a nuisance, without mentioning it being a bigger target.
Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far.
To justify Laser Gunner's place at the second highest in A tier, Laser Gunner is very reliable in the early game, checking off many things like both stealth and flying detection, all while being extremely cost efficient. The only thing really holding Laser Gunner back is its later upgrades, where its abilities aren't as reliable. Its top path can be useful to slow fast enemies, whereas the bottom path offers decent crowd control and even unstealthing capabilities. However, can easily be substituted for other towers who specialize in that role. So while Laser Gunner's early game is quite solid, that's all you're really using it for. Entering the number 1 spot in A tier is the man, the myth, the legend, Juggernaut. Juggernaut is a very solid mid to late game DPS tower to this day, benefiting greatly from support towers such as EDJ and John, providing even more value from its high base damage output, additionally being extremely cost efficient overall. As for the paths, its bottom unlocks stealth detection and stun immunity, while its top gains armor penetration. Quickly onto the cons. Its stealth detection costs 18,000 in total to unlock, while also being stuck to that path in particular, making it rather unreliable to be used for that purpose. Juggernaut's bottom path has quite the low range and a 1-second aim time, which can cause it to struggle with faster enemies, like the jumpers. And lastly, has no flying detection. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Juggernaut's place at the pinnacle of A tier, Juggernaut has withstood the sands of time and is still a very reliable mid to late game DPS tower, all while being extremely cost efficient. The trade-off for having such power is that it can't really cover all bases at once. Its top path has great range and armor penetration, however, it lacks hidden detection. Then there's the bottom path, which does have hidden detection and even higher DPS, but struggles against bullet resistance. While Juggernaut isn't a one-man army, he is still an extremely powerful DPS tower, if his weaknesses are accounted for. Entering the best of the best towers for the expert rework at the start of S tier, we have the Scarecrow. Scarecrow is the cheapest bait option by far. At the low price of 50 coins, has an extremely small placement size. Scarecrow. Scarecrow. On to the cons. Scarecrow has low HP, no attacks or abilities, and is replaceable in terms of bait ability, with towers that can actually provide defense and value alongside its bait ability. And lastly, being an event tower hinders its accessibility. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Scarecrow's placement at the start of S tier, Scarecrow is the best tower in terms of bait ability with its extremely low placement price, and since that is the tower's sole purpose. Anywho, Scarecrow's ranking was obviously some sick joke by you guys to mess up the tier list placements. I am disappointed. Next up at the actual bottom of S tier is good old reliable Farm. Farm has a low skill floor, making understanding how to use it at its surface level quite easy. You spend money to make money. Generally increases in value when playing with more people, essentially acting as a baseline eco and can generate more money collectively. Farm's top path can make significantly more money based on nearby tower value and can also increase base health, whereas the bottom simply gives a fixed amount of money with no other additives. On to the cons. Farm has a high skill ceiling to utilize it at its peak potential. Overspending/investing can result in a lack of defense, which can then result in a loss. High investment into the farm may demand more teamwork and communication to ensure a proper defense. I'm just sick of those players sitting around all game and farming. Farm is also not always necessary if the baseline eco is high enough, such as in solo or duo matches. A more nuanced con is the cash per wave is given slowly, which can discourage skipping. Then obviously has no direct defense capability, aside from giving base health. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Farm's placement at the lower end of S tier, Farm has both a low skill floor and a high skill ceiling, making it very flexible and accessible to all kinds of players. Farm being a sole economy focused tower makes defending generally easier since it enables the usage of stronger, more expensive towers. The only downsides are honestly its strength, While its skill ceiling is quite high, it rewards you for putting in the effort. However, if not utilized correctly, can be a waste of your time. That can even result in a loss. Following suit in the lower end of S tier is Tower Battle's Commander. Commander possesses superior support capabilities, even synergizing well with other support towers. For instance, his Call to Arms ability grants a 30% damage buff that can stack with John and Medic's damage buff abilities. Commander also still provides great value independently. As it happens, he offers a range buff that can measure up to EDJ's range buff. Then there's Commander's incredible leak protection capabilities, having two abilities that can help in different ways. First off is his ability to call in a APC, having a decent chunk of HP every so often. Secondly, we have his airstrike that instantly deals 2000 damage with explosive penetration that can be used anywhere on the map and has a fairly short cooldown. Commander also shoots his pistol whenever he activates his Call to Arm ability, but nobody really cares about that. Also, being an event tower gives Commander only one upgrade path, which makes using it very straightforward. Lastly, his support range is quite high. Onto his cons? First of all, Commander being an event tower makes accessibility rather limited. Then there's his underwhelming passive damage buff, heavily encouraging Call to Arms ability usage. Speaking of which, can't buff towers that have the no friendly buffs attribute, obviously. Then lastly, Commander's leak protection abilities can't target flying enemies. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Commander's placement at the lower half of S tier, Commander possesses powerful support abilities, even being able to work well with other support towers, offering both tower buffs and leak protection. The only thing really holding Commander back is his inaccessibility due to him being an event tower, and is honestly interchangeable with EDJ and John, making his presence not absolutely necessary. Next up, in the lower half of S tier, is the bane of my existence, the AA turret. As its name suggests, it specializes against countering flying enemies. Insane cost efficiency, insane range, and insane damage output. All against flying enemies, of course. It is incredibly useful throughout the entire game. Can solely deal with flying enemies, allowing the rest of your loadout to be less dependent on having flying detection. And lastly, the AA turret has the ability to rebuild itself once after dying, which inadvertently makes it a... it makes it debatable. Cons? What cons? Obviously, can't hit ground enemies, making it replaceable with other towers that have flying detection. The AA turret is extremely fragile in terms of HP on the early upgrades, which doesn't help that it can't be healed nor buffed. Lastly, its top path upgrades gains a dead zone, and a large one at that, discouraging placing closer to the path. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify the AA turret in the lower half of S tier, the AA turret is an absolute beast, excelling greatly in its specialized role. Its insane damage output, paired with both its immaculate cost efficiency and range, makes flying enemies a non-existent threat, allowing you to focus on different parts of your defense. The only thing that wouldn't make the AA turret the #1 S tier tower is its inability to hit ground enemies. Every other con it possesses are very small and negligible issues. Its fragile nature and massive dead zone can be instantly solved if placed farther away, which is quite frankly encouraged with its massive range. Slowly entering the middle of S tier is the helicopter, or as John likes to put it, the attack helo. Helicopter is a solid all-rounder tower, being versatile throughout the entire game. Having innate flying detection, both paths unlocking stealth detection, armor penetration, and passive missiles. All that paired with Heli's high health points, high damage output, and great crowd control. As for the paths, the top one takes a more oppressive role, gaining passive anti-air missiles for solely targeting air enemies, while the bottom takes a more supportive role, revealing stealth in enemies within its range and is able to even stealth itself. Heli, being a flying tower, gives it map-wide range, allowing it to fly anywhere and is unaffected by the line of sight mechanic, additionally not taking any tower placement space. Lastly, helicopter is fairly easy to manage/move, having multiple ways to reposition itself, manually, following the player, or pursuing the first enemy, which also gives it the ability to avoid or even mitigate enemy attacks. Cons? What cons? Heli's earlier levels are quite expensive for the value you're getting. Has a limited placement limit of 3 to 8 depending on team size. Then there's his survivability. The attack helo can struggle to survive due to strong anti-air enemy attacks, and it doesn't help that it is also a priority target for most bosses, which can make it get killed easily even with its large health pool. While it does have the ability to reposition, it involves increased attention and micro. And lastly, can't be healed nor buffed. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify helicopter's placement at the middle of S tier, Attack Helo is an extremely well-rounded tower. Its potential is only limited by its placement limit and the overwhelming amount of enemies that can target it. However, if the effort is put in, Heli essentially has zero downsides. Its survivability is entirely dependable on how much the player wishes to micro. For reference, you can solo the entirety of Expert with just Heli. Let that sink in. At the exact middle point of S tier is the Railgunner. Railgunner is a high damage dealing tower that thrives in the mid to late game, specializing in taking down slow and tanky targets, especially bosses, benefiting greatly from damage buffing support towers like Commander and John. Railgunner also has a decent bit of crowd control on its top path, additionally gaining stealth and flying detection, faster fire rate, and pierce, while the bottom path focuses more on single target damage, getting significantly more range and damage alongside stun immunity. And lastly, has a high health pool. Onto the cons. Railgunner has a slow fire rate, even more so on the bottom path with its additional aim time, which also actually reduces fire rate buff effectiveness. Railgunner is also rather expensive to place and upgrade. And lastly, is weak to laser resistance. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Railgunner's placement at the exact middle point of S tier, Railgunner is a tried and true, quite frankly timeless, tower that serves its purpose extremely well, being able to handle slow and tanky enemies with ease and making boss fights extremely one-sided. His newfound flying detection capabilities also makes him very reliable during the mid-game. However, Railgunner's strength can also be turned against it when encountering fast enemies, enforcing a more slow and steady playstyle. There's also a case to be made with laser resistance, causing him to be less reliable in the later waves. Entering the upper half of S tier, we have the man himself, John. John is a jack of all trades, mostly, being a solid early to mid-game option and even late if taking its support value into consideration. He's also quite cheap to place and has low amounts of HP, making him baitable. Firstly, John is very cheap and cost efficient, especially in his early upgrades. Secondly, he gets bullet penetration on both paths. Additionally, stun immunity. Thirdly, there are his upgrade paths that further enforce his versatility. John's bottom path focuses on crowd control / general damage with a shotgun conversion and an axe ability dealing large amounts of damage to enemies within range. Then, on the other hand, there's John's top path, which prioritizes his extra range and cheaper early upgrades, especially his damage buff ability. Onto the cons. John, unfortunately, doesn't have flying detection nor stealth detection, except for his max top path, trading it for bullet penetration, ruining his almost jack-of-all-tradeness. And lastly, has low HP, which makes John's survivability in the early game quite dicey. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify John's placement at the upper half of S tier, John is quite versatile throughout all stages of the game. Whether that be covering the early game, bait ability, single target or crowd control, and taking on a more supportive role, John covers many bases, but not everything, which holds him back by a lot. To justify John's placement at the upper half of S tier, John is quite versatile throughout all stages of the game, whether that be covering the early game, bait ability, single target or crowd control, and taking on a more supportive role. John covers many bases, but not everything. The lack of flying and stealth detection keep him from being the best early game tower. While John can cover a decent amount, there are still some areas he falls short in. At the doorstep of the upper 3 S tier towers is none other than Mr. Power Creep himself, Golden Juggernaut. Golden Juggernaut is an extremely solid mid to late game DPS tower, essentially being the upgraded version of base Juggernaut. Very cost efficient overall for the value you're getting, decent range and high damage output, benefiting greatly from support buffs since his base stats are already so high. Then there are his paths. On the top one, gains more range, pierce, and eventually golden resistance penetration, while his bottom path gains significantly more damage. Golden Juggernaut generally has high HP on both paths, additionally unlocking an ability that buffs damage, heals, unstuns, all while having a short cooldown. Onto the golden cons. Golden Juggernaut is very expensive overall, having absolutely no flying detection as well. Then there is the infamous golden resistance that tanks Golden Juggernaut's damage. Lastly is a priority target for most bosses, which can get him killed quite easily regardless of his large health pool. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Golden Juggernaut's placement at the edge of top 3 S tier towers, Golden Juggernaut is an absolute unit of a tower, possessing overwhelming amounts of pure power. However, with great power comes great government taxes. Golden Juggernaut is very expensive to invest in, which doesn't help that he is simultaneously a priority target in boss fights. Additionally, Golden Resistance can be very annoying to deal with. So while he is an absolute beast, there are many foes ready to collect his bounty. Now entering the top 3 S tier towers, we have Medic. Medic provides very strong survivability support through healing attacks, essentially saving a substantial amount of money by preventing tower deaths. It also has a fairly low skill floor, being easy to use / understand. You place the guy down and he heals. Medic has 2 abilities on each path that offer different utilities. His top path grants a single tower and itself complete invulnerability to damage and debuffs, which also cleanses debuffs on use. Whereas the bottom can buff the damage of a tower by a staggering 200%, which can be boosted further with specifically Commander's Call to Arms. Lastly, Medic has a decent bit of range that can be buffed further by supports. Onto the cons. Medic obviously doesn't deal any damage. That would break the rules of war. Medic possesses a fairly high skill ceiling to use at its maximum potential and effectively. For instance, overspending can result in a lack of damage output, which can then result in a loss. Then, oddly enough, Medic can't change its targeting, forcing it to stay on closest. And lastly, has a limited placement limit of 6 to 9. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify Medic's placement in the top 3 S-tier towers, Medic is extremely reliable since a good chunk of enemies deal damage in a variety of doses, some being extremely lethal if left unchecked. The only real issue Medic has is its high skill ceiling, being a bit difficult to use effectively and at its maximum potential. At the second place of S tier is the former best late game tower, the XWM turret. XWM is an immaculate late game tower, being super easy to use and understand while providing great value. Possesses innate flying detection, unlocking stealth detection and stun immunity on both paths, and lastly, generally has high range and damage output, all while being very low maintenance, which is mainly thanks to XWM's incredible survivability with its high health and ability to rebuild itself 3 times. XWM is capable of dishing out lots of damage in different ways regarding its upgrade paths. Top path focuses on single target damage, eventually even unlocking bullet penetration. The bottom path, on the other hand, focuses on crowd control with missiles and increased range. Onto the cons. Starting off, XWM has quite the placement size, taking up lots of space and makes playing on hard maps rather difficult. Then there's its long rebuild time on top of having the no friendly buffs attribute. As for the other issues that aren't that problematic, considering how expensive XWM is, it has a limited placement limit of 10 to 40 depending on the team size. Then there is the large dead zone the bottom path receives, which can discourage placing close to the path. You wouldn't really be putting it close to the path anyways regarding its placement size. Lastly, the XWM turret isn't cheap at all, with both its placement cost and later upgrades being very expensive. It also doesn't help that the all-new dynamic price scaling makes it even more expensive per max turret. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify XWM turret's placement at the second place in S tier, XWM is an absolute beast, no doubt, covering many bases all while dishing out ridiculous amounts of DPS, on top of how extremely low maintenance it is. However, its strength is also its greatest weakness. XWM is simply overkill for expert. The sheer amount of money it would take to get a handful of them down is simply too much to use without any advanced preparation. Finally, the moment you've all been waiting for. The number 1 S-tier tower, standing above all others. Make some noise for the EDJ! EDJ possesses superior support capabilities, its value determined simply by how many towers are within her range, provides a passive range and fire rate buff to nearby towers. And she only gets stronger and provides even more utility as we dive deeper into her upgrade paths. Top 1 increases the passive buffs and unlocks an ability that significantly boosts the fire rate buff up to a staggering 60%. Bottom, on the other side, provides strong eco support through tower upgrade discounts of up to 30% up until its max upgrades, as well as increased tower sellback rate and reduced ability cooldowns. And lastly, synergizes well with other support towers, such as John, Commander, and Medic by stacking buffs. Onto the opposite of pros. Obviously, being a support tower, EDJ has no offensive capabilities, which doesn't help the fact that she has very low HP. EDJ also possesses a decently high skill ceiling, being difficult to learn and use effectively, going back to the overspending issue other support towers share. And, most importantly, can't buff certain towers such as XWM, Heli, and Worship. One last time. Here are the community votes in the form of a pie chart, and its ranking on the list so far. To justify EDJ's placement at the pinnacle of the tier list, EDJ consistently provides amazing support value, arguably being the best in her field, even being able to synergize well with other support towers. The only real con being her fragile nature and not being able to buff certain towers. But other than that, she still provides insane utility to almost 90% of the other towers.